have I got a story for you. In 2010, 546 people were executed in Iranian prisons. However, the speculation over the actual numbers is much, much higher. But out of that 546 reported executions, 8 of them were women, and this story is about one of those women. Qazvin is located in the northwestern part of Iran. Although it's not as economically rich as, say, Tehran, it's not exactly poor, and the 500,000 people that live there are classed as middle class. But given the fact that religion really dominates Qazvin, the showing off of excess wealth is considered to be in poor taste, so residents come up with more subtle ways of showing off their excesses through the wearing of things like jewelry. And this is the environment Mahin Qadiri would grow up in. Born in 1977, she entered the world at the precipice of change in Iran. There was an all-out civil war. You see, prior to 1979, Iran was ruled by a Shah named Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. And Mohammed loved Western culture. He loved it so much that the laws in Iran at that time were so relaxed that women wore mini-skirts and makeup. Young people listened to rock and roll and went out to nightclubs. They drank alcohol and women went to universities. Religion was very much separated from government. So society on the surface appeared to be way more relaxed and free, even for women. But just beneath the surface, things weren't exactly as they seemed. The Shah had a secret police called the Savak, and the Savak would round up anybody that spoke badly about the Shah or his new US-American advisor friends or the pro-Western laws he was passing in the country. You see, not everybody was happy with the progressive changes he was making to their country. Many Iranians felt like their national identity had been stripped and replaced with an American one. Society was less influenced by Islam, and some felt immorality was starting to creep in. But the biggest problem inside Iran at the time was the wealth inequality. If you were rich, educated, urban, and secular, then Iran in 78 was amazing. If you were poor, uneducated, rural, and religious, then Iran felt very much oppressive and humiliating. That's why in 1979, when the revolution happened, millions of Iranians supported it. They didn't want disco and Pepsi, they wanted dignity, justice, and real independence, free from US and Israeli involvement. But what came next, nobody expected. When a person or government is quickly removed from a position of power, very often a power vacuum is created, meaning that many people want to fill that power position, and it usually goes to the most violent ones. Let's be real about it. In times like this, nobody's vote counts. A man named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was an important underground figure for Iranians who hated the rule under the Shah's maniacal regime. He was a very prominent Islamic figure at the time. Cassette tapes of his sermons would be smuggled into Iran, as he had been exiled out of the country years prior for his outspoken opposition to the Shah. He felt like the Shah had sold off Iran to the US and Israel. And he was like, the values of Islam and our Iranian culture are just going out of the window with the Shah's pro-Western policies. So as the wealth inequality was growing, so too was the Ayatollah's underground support. And the Shah, he knew this. Now, as said before, the illusion of freedom is just that. The Shah still controlled much of the media, and as such, one newspaper called the Etela'at, probably butchered that, which was one of the oldest newspapers in Iran at the time, on January 7th, 1978, they would post an article heavily criticizing the Ayatollah that would eventually bring the Shah's monarchy crashing down. In the article, the newspaper accused the Ayatollah of working with the British and the communists. They were also saying that he was of low class and was trying to destabilize Iranian society. This, of course, went down like a lead balloon, and mass protests erupted all across the country, in particular Tehran. And it's in Tehran that these protesters would be massacred by the Shah's police force, opening fire and killing dozens of them. Most of them were religious students. And this continued for some time. There'd be a break in the protests for them to mourn the dead, and then they'd start protesting again, and again the police would kill more of them. And this happened until September of 1978, on a day that is remembered as Black Friday, when hundreds of unarmed protesters were gunned down in the streets by the Shah's police. It is said that blood ran through the streets of Tehran on that day. And this was a massive turning point because the revolution was underway. By January the following year in 1979, the Shah would actually flee Iran. The following month, the Ayatollah, he would arrive in Iran. And straight away, he's declaring himself as the supreme leader, and he starts enacting Sharia law. He turns Iran into an Islamic state, meaning that the freedoms the people once had to, particularly for women to dress how they wanted, they were now gone. Women had to wear the hijab out in public. People couldn't drink alcohol anymore. Women were not allowed to go on to education. The new gender segregation laws were enacted. And anybody criticizing the Ayatollah's new regime, well, arrests, tortures, and public executions would follow. By the end of 1979, supporters of the Iranian Revolution stormed the US embassy. They would take 50 US hostages, and they wouldn't resolve this hostage situation for almost a year and a half. And that would be only when the US agreed to sever all ties with Iran. They had to leave and never come back, which they would eventually agree to. For the next several decades, Iran was marred by war. Thousands of political prisoners were hanged by forces loyal to the Ayatollah. Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces would enter the country thinking they could take over Iran because they felt like they had been weakened by this civil war, only to be met with resistance, and 8 years of fighting would take place, killing over 1 million people. The 90s in Iran was a time for rebuilding. The wealthy and a lot of the educated had fled to Western countries like Canada, Australia, and the United States. For the people living inside of Iran, life revolved around religion, modesty, and Iranian tradition. In the city of Qazvin at this time, Mahin Qadiri is approaching her teenage years. Qazvin is a very watchful place, tightly controlled with everybody up in everyone else's business. It's all about keeping up appearances in public, attending mosques, martyrdom commemorations for the ones who died to make this place as great as what it is. Life revolved very much around family and religion. At the age of 14, Mahim would marry a man that her parents had chosen for her. Arranged marriages are still very common in different parts of the world. Since she left school in the 3rd grade, her role was set out for her. She was to be a dutiful wife and raise a family. And by the age of 15, Mahim would have her first child, a daughter. This was a huge turning point in Mahim's life. Motherhood deeply affected her. She devoted all of her time and energy to taking care of this little bundle of joy. It would be in the late 90s when she would have a second daughter, and that would complete the family unit. Mahim the mother, her husband, and her 2 daughters. The reason the ages and identities of her children are not known is due to the police not disclosing them for the daughter's protection, given the crimes that their mother would go on to do. But from here, Mahim really fell in the trap of keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. Having grown up poor, she did not want that for her daughters. She wanted to give them everything and more. She really understood the stigma that came with growing up in the lower class in Iran at this time. Her and her husband were raising the girls in a place called Minadar, and it's a pretty okay middle class area. It's not lush, it's not extravagant, it's not poor either. Mahim drove a pretty okay Peugeot 206, a nice yellow one. The children always wore nice clothes and went to a nice school, and their hair was always done nicely. From the outside, Mahim and her family looked like they were doing great. But like most appearances, when you scratch just below the surface, things aren't always what they seem. Behind her husband's back, Mahim had started racking up debt. She wanted everything and more for her daughters. She didn't want them being left behind. And when her husband found out, this put an enormous strain on their relationship, to the point her husband started to have to work more, and over time, the couple just grew more distant and colder to one another. It's also during this time Mahim is starting to find refuge in books. You see, during her pregnancy, she had taught herself to read. Now, given the situation Mahim and her husband are in with the stresses of raising a young family and the finances, Mahim's started diving into darker literature. And it was while she was walking past a street vendor who would sell secondhand paperback books, she came across Agatha Christie crime novels about murder. It would be over the next several years when Mahim would develop a deep fascination into these murder books. She loved reading about why they committed the murder, how they committed the murder, how they got caught, if they did ever get caught. She just intensely was fascinated by these books, these fantasy books. She was just enthralled by these books the second her eyes laid on the words on those pages. She just couldn't get enough of them. But while she was falling deeper and deeper into these fictional novels, her life was falling apart all around her. She had continued on with her reckless spending to the point that her husband just up and left her. He moves out of the apartment. Now, for a while, Mahim would try to keep up the facade that the family unit was still together, and she would tell neighbors that her husband was just away visiting sick relatives, or he was away with work. But over time, and as longer on he stayed away from the place, she just couldn't hide it anymore. People knew that he had left her and she was now a single mother. Now, for the first year or so, Mahim's husband would still financially support her. He would send her money and pay bills, but after a while, he noticed that things with her finances weren't getting any better. She continued to just misspend money. So he got to the point where he's like, I'm not sending her any more money anymore. And he just cut her off. He left her high and dry. It was at this time that Mahim could start seeing in the eyes of her neighbors and people that knew her situation that they looked at her with almost pity and somewhat disgust. Like, what did she do to create this situation that she's now in? They blamed her for her husband leaving, and to a degree, I guess, with her misspending and going behind her husband's back. I mean, there is some truth to it, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And there wasn't really a lot Mahim could do about it because she didn't have the education to just go out there and get a job. So she was really stuck trying to work around her neighbors in her community. So she would clean houses, she would help people with shopping, and she would be a seamstress fixing and repairing clothes and even making clothes. But to get those jobs, she would have to undercut other people. So she'd be doing them for next to nothing. And this was just to try and get the bills paid, get food in the fridge, get her kids to school. And she found that once she paid one bill, another bill would appear. And she was basically felt like she was like a rat on a running wheel who just couldn't get off this treadmill. So it would be early 2005 when Mahim would come very much to a crossroads. She had to make a decision. She was extremely angered by her situation. The way her husband left her high and dry, the way her neighbors would look at her. So it would be on a cold grey morning in 2005 when she would cross a line there would be no coming back from. She knew an elderly neighbor, a man in his 60s who lived alone. She would see him from time to time making his way to the local bus stop to go to the shops, and he always walked with a cane and sort of waddled down the road. So on this particular morning, Mahim goes over to his door and she knocks on it. He answers and she says, "Would you like a trip to the shops? I'm going to be going to the shops. I will give you a lift if you like." And he agrees because he looks outside and you can see that it's cloudy and he's like, it's probably going to rain. You're an angel. Thank you. So he accepts the offer. Mahin would help the old man to a car and they would both get in and she would start driving off. It's inside the car where Mahin offers the old man a juice box, and out of politeness he accepts it. But what he doesn't know is that this juice box is laden with Benadryl. You see, Mahin had injected the cough syrup through the foil in the top of the juice box, and she'd just resealed it. And what would happen if a person drank that, particularly an elderly person who might be on medication, is they would start getting drowsy and they would fall asleep. And this is exactly what happened. So when the old man fell asleep, Mahin is driving the car looking for a quiet laneway where there's nobody around. She finally finds one and she turns into it. Mahin would lean over and start strangling the man with a scarf that was around her neck. At some point, the old man tries to sit up and she's fighting with him to get him back down. And eventually he does. He just doesn't have the strength to fight her off, and she murders him. From here, she takes the old man's gold wedding ring. He still wore that even though his wife had been deceased for many years. She takes his watch and she strips him of any cash that he had on him. She then gets out of the car and walks around to the passenger side, opening the door and dumping his body off to the side before driving off. It would be a passerby later on during the day that would find the old man and call the police. When they found out his identity, they went around to the apartment blocks where he lived and started investigating what may have happened. Some of Mahin's neighbors would tell the police that they saw her and him that morning. So they go over to Mahin's apartment and they start questioning her. Some of the answers she gives are quite suspicious, so they decide to take her downtown. And when the autopsy reports came back that the old man had a large quantity of Benadryl in his system, they came to the conclusion that a woman could very well have done this, so they go ahead and charge her with murder. But unfortunately, when it went to the courts, the judge decided that they just didn't have enough evidence to move ahead with charges, so they dismissed the case due to lack of evidence. For Mahin, this was very much a close call, and she was very much lucky in the fact that the day she took the old man's jewelry was the same day she pawned it, and the money that she got from it she spent on bills, because they didn't find any large quantities of cash on her or any of his items. And that's really why I think the judge believed that, you know, she's probably innocent. She wasn't found guilty. The case was just dismissed due to lack of evidence. So from here, Mahin still continues to work small jobs around the local area. And she falls back into that cycle of getting one bill paid and then having another one arrive, and it's just never ending. And she desperately wants to maintain this middle-class lifestyle for her daughters and also the appearance. Like, people look at her and they know that her husband had left, but she can do it on her own. And she really wanted to show the world that. And I know it's very easy to sit back and say, well, why didn't she just return home to her parents and they could have helped her? But she was from a poverty-stricken background, so her parents couldn't even really help themselves, much less help her with her two young daughters now. So as the years rolled into 2009, Mahin's struggles hit a fever pitch. The constant battle against these bills was just growing too much. Her escapism into her fiction novels had turned more into a study guide. The murder stories she would read about were now giving her inspiration to go on to commit her own murders. And she did fantasize about doing this as well. And just 4 years earlier, she did get away with murder, but given that fact, now reflecting on it, she realizes, you know, I can correct some of the mistakes that I made and I can come up with the perfect murder. So she starts hatching a plan. So she basically comes to the conclusion that her first murder, being a neighbor and being in an area where everybody knew her, was not a very smart idea because she was identified. So this next person has to be a stranger and it has to be somewhere else. She also found at one point when she was strangling the man, because she was leaning over to the side, when he fought back, she was nearly overpowered. So she comes up with this idea that whoever the victim is going to be, I'm going to put them in the back of the seat. That way, when they fall asleep, I'll just lean over and I'll be able to use my full force leaning forward because I'm leaning from the front to the back and I'll be able to strangle them that way. She also comes to the conclusion that this time it's not going to be a man. I'm going to target little old ladies because that way, even if they do wake up, they're not going to be able to overpower me. There's just no way. So now she's starting to wonder, where can I meet a complete stranger where if I offer them a lift that they're going to accept because they're very trusting? And that's when she realizes, I'll meet them at the mosque. People leaving the mosque, she'll just single out little old ladies and ask them, hey, do you want a lift? And being that we're at the mosque, I'll talk about the sermons and how good it was and win them over. I'll win their trust that way. So it's May of that year when she drives to a mosque a little bit away from where she lives, and she parks a few hundred meters down the road. As she's sitting in the car, she's scoping out the scene and looking for potential victims. Now, she's looking at, are they alone, number one, but number two, if they are, do they have any visible jewelry that looks expensive? She would eventually encounter a little old lady who had just left the mosque. She was walking alone, so she goes up to her. Straight away, she's talking about how good the sermon was, and she just says to the lady, hey, look, I'm heading to the shops. Would you like a lift home? I'll be glad to give you a lift home. And the old lady says, oh, that would be lovely, please. So Mahin escorts the old lady to her car and she gets her to sit in the back because she says there's something wrong with the front passenger seat. Mahin looks around and sees that there's nobody around as she gets in the car and she starts driving. Whilst in the car, she offers the old lady a juice box, and again, out of politeness, the old lady takes it and starts drinking it. Inside the car, Mahin is working overtime, telling the old lady how she reminds her of her own mother and just really winning her over and winning her trust. After a while, the little old lady starts to feel drowsy and nods off to sleep. It would be here that Mahin would turn into a laneway where there was nobody around, and again, she would strangle this old lady, and once she was dead, she'd remove her possessions and dump her body off to the side and drive off. For Mahin, the murder went exactly to plan, and in fact, off everything she stole off these victims, she made anywhere between $50 and $100. That was really it. Mahin would go on to kill another 4 elderly women that she met at various mosques around Qazvin. She didn't just target one mosque, she went to multiple ones because word started to spread amongst the police and the mosque goers that there was a potential serial killer on the loose killing little old ladies who were leaving the mosque, because they'd basically put 2 and 2 together that when these reports started coming in that the people went missing just after leaving the mosque and their bodies were later found that day in alleyways. So on this particular day, Mahin goes to a mosque and she again entices a little old lady into a car. Again, the little old lady sits in the back seat. Again, Mahin offers the lady a juice box, to which she politely takes it. But in this case, this little old lady was a little bit sus on Mahin because she starts noticing that one, Mahin is acting a little strange, so she doesn't drink what's in the juice box. And 2, Mahin had missed a turn and she had told her, oh, I live back that way, you've got to take this turn. So Mahin's making all these excuses because she's trying to keep this little old lady in the car longer. And the lady just says, listen, can you just pull over? I'm getting out. And Mahin just pulls over and lets her out. Now this lady, this little old lady, she goes to the police and gives a description of Mahin. She says, it's this woman, she's in her early 30s. She explains what she looks like, and she drives this little yellow Peugeot 206. So the police now have a car and they start scouring the police database for people that own Peugeots, and there are thousands of these things in the city of Qazvin. Eventually they stumble across Mahin Qadiri. She owns a Peugeot 206. She'd also been accused of murdering an elderly man just 4 years prior. And the murders were pretty much identical, except for it was a man. I mean, the bodies were laced with Benadryl. They knew that whoever was doing this was giving them Benadryl, was lacing something with Benadryl and getting these people to drink it to render them unconscious. So these murders, the murder in 2005 and these 4 murders now, they're looking very, very similar. So they pay Mahin a visit. They get to her house and they decide, you know what, we're going to arrest her and take her downtown. And it's downtown where Mahin just she spills the beans on everything. She tells the police, yes, I committed these 4 murders. Yes, I committed the murder back in 2005. But the reason I did it is because society, my ex-husband, everybody just let me down. Nobody helped me. Nobody supported me. I had to look after my daughters on my own. I'm getting these judgmental looks from all these people, or they're looking at me with pity. Nobody's helping me, and I did what I had to do to support myself and my kids. Mahin would be convicted of murdering all 5 people, and she would be sentenced to death by the judge. Now, in Iran, they don't muck around. You're not going to sit on death row for 20 years like they do in the United States. It's going to happen pretty quickly. So a little over a year later, just after sunrise at 5 a.m. inside the Qazvin prison, Mahin would be walked to a podium. Blindfolded with her hands tied behind her back, a noose would be placed around her neck and a crane would raise her feet off the ground, which would eventually kill her. There would be no family or friends in attendance. It was just prison guards and the executioners. Her 2 daughters over the years, although their names were kept out of the media, they would experience ostracization from the community, from the school. They would experience bullying from people, and their life was just a living hell after what their mother had done. And the irony of all of that is that the reason Mahin was killing these elderly people was to keep her daughters looking like they were middle class. So the judgmental people would basically leave them alone, but because of her actions, the judgmental people just judged them even worse. It's like you're in a lose-lose situation regardless. This is why don't keep up with the Joneses and don't try to like impress other people. Just live your life to the way you want to live it. Just don't do this. Like seriously, Christ. But that's the story of Mahin Qadiri, Iran's first ever female serial killer. And may her victims rest in peace. Again, there's not a lot of information on this case, so I don't know the victims' names, but may all 5 of them rest in peace. And as always, please stay safe out there in internet land.